The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Hello and welcome to Perspectives. My name is David Schoeneman. I'm your host in this program, and I'm the Alderman for Ward 3 here in the city of Nashua. As you know from Perspectives, if you've seen us on the air in the past, we typically discuss political issues that affect voters and taxpayers here in Nashua, and we do it from the Aldermanic Chamber in City Hall. We're in a different environment today. We're actually out at the Nashua Airport, at your Nashua Airport, for a big event. A couple of weeks ago, we had Rob Holland on the show. Rob is one of the best aerobatic pilots in the world, based right here in Nashua. He's a graduate of Daniel Webster College, and he's flying all over the world. In fact, today he's down in Rhode Island, not very far away, but he's down in Rhode Island for an air show. A couple of weeks ago, he was down in South Africa for an air show. We're at the Nashua Airport, and you might be able to hear airplanes taking off and landing in the background. We're here, again, like I say, for a very special occasion. Today, we're taking a look not at political issues, but at a community activity that is available to residents here in Nashua and throughout the region. I'm at the Nashua Airport with the B-29 bomber, which you may know flew into town a few days ago. Just to my left here, you can see the propeller for this airplane. I'm standing under the wing. Propeller for this airplane is taller than I am. It's got 4 blades. It moves this massive bomber through the air. And it's a chance today, which we're going to do in a few minutes, to come out and take a look and take a tour and talk to the people that are responsible for this airplane, keeping it in the air and facilitating this tour around the nation. This is the B-29 FIFI. Again, you've seen pictures of it in the paper. This airplane is the only flying B-29 in the world. B-29 was very active in the Pacific War in particular, and it was involved in bombing runs over Japan. Not this particular airplane, but one just like it. And again, this is the only flying B-29 in the world. In just a moment, we're going to talk to some of the flight crew. We may have a chance to talk with a veteran who flew in an airplane like this back during World War II as well. History is very important. And if you have a chance, if not on this visit, on future visits, to bring your children out and take a look and see what their ancestors did to keep America safe, to preserve freedom, to give us a world where democracy can guide our lives, or be at least the government that we use to facilitate living in a free, self-governed society. Let's go take a look inside the B-29. Hello again. We're on our way to a tour of the B-29 bomber out here at the Nashua Airport. We ran into a veteran, Pete Ziner, who was with the U.S. Army Air Corps back during World War II and flew on a B-29. Weren't expecting to have this opportunity, but we have an opportunity today to speak with someone who flew on one of these airplanes in the closing months of the war in the Pacific, World War II. Pete Ziner, welcome. Thank you very much for agreeing to be on the interview here.
Well, it's always a pleasure to see this airplane.
Now, you spent quite a number of hours on this airplane, and you were a radar operator, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And where did you sit on the B-29?
I sat right beside this window.
Not much of a view.
I looked at the number 2 engine, and most of the time it was running.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that. We have to have, you have 4 of them, so if one doesn't work, I guess you still get 3 more. But
no, actually, ours never failed. We were very fortunate. We had a brand new airplane, which we picked up in May, and of course the war ended in August. I don't believe that we ever had any problems, none while we were flying anyway.
And you were based out of Guam, is that correct?
Yes, there were two B-29 airfields on Guam. We were on Northwest. And it was quite an area.
Certainly. Now, as the radar operator, you would actually fly the airplane when it came time to fly the mission. The pilot took it to landfall, basically, and then you provided the final guidance to the target.
When we got to the landfall, the pilot put the plane on autopilot, and I had a turn control knob, and I directed the plane because I could see the direction, and I corrected for any wind.
I see.
That was blowing us off course, and we flew from landfall to a so-called initial point, and then made a turn from initial point toward the target area. And I was in conversation with the bombardier, and I gave him certain information which he put into the bomb site, the Norden bomb site.
The famous Norden bomb site, yes.
And essentially, with the information that I gave him, the bomb site became a trigger. And there were two dials that came together on the bomb site, and when those two dials met, bombs fell out, prior to which the bomb bay doors had opened.
I see.
So it was used as a trigger mechanism.
I see. And I understand that the bombing on the planes you were on was very accurate because you had a special radar on that airplane.
Yes, we had a radar that was called the APQ-7. I never learned what APQ stood for, but it was pretty good. And we did the whole 315th Bomb Wing, of which we were a part, was equipped with this particular radar. And that's one of the reasons why we came over so late.
I see.
Waiting for the planes to be equipped with this radar, as differentiated from the radars that were on the previous 4 wings.
I see.
There were actually 5 wings of B-29s. We were the last one.
And you flew in the very last bombing mission of the war.
That's right.
Can you tell us about that? Now, this is not the Hiroshima or Nagasaki missions.
No, those had already been done.
I see, but there was still a little bit of fighting left to be done until Japan surrendered, and you flew in the very last mission. Tell us a little bit about that, if you can.
The last mission was sort of held up because there were rumors about the impending surrender. But finally, they decided to send the mission, and it was on August 14th. We left Guam at about 4:30
in the morning.
In the afternoon.
In the afternoon, okay.
We flew all night missions.
I see.
About 4:30 in the afternoon, and we perhaps arrived at the target area around 12 or 1 o'clock. I don't recall exactly when it was. And dropped our bombs and headed back to Guam. And on the way back, we were listening to the Armed Forces radio, and we heard that the war had ended. And so we kept on going, trying to get to Guam while the party was still on. But unfortunately, those who had celebrated were fast asleep at 10 o'clock in the morning.
Now, why was that?
They might have exhausted all the booze on the island. And of course, we were kind of tired too. So
of course, it was a very long flight.
Yeah.
What was that total distance?
A 3,500-mile round trip.
And how many hours did that take?
17.
Wow. And these airplanes did not do any aerial refueling?
That didn't exist at that time.
Did not exist, so they had to carry all that fuel for 4 engines to get out and back.
Normally, we carried 10 tons of bombs, 500-pound bombs. But on the last mission, they didn't have enough 500-pound bombs left, so we had a whole bunch of smaller ones.
I see.
And we had 6,700 gallons of fuel.
Wow.
So it was a pretty heavy load.
Pretty heavy airplane. Did you have fighter escort on that trip?
No.
Were you the only bomber on that trip, or was the entire wing
no,
going?
The whole wing. Oh, well, I don't know if it was the entire wing, but I think it was. And we flew in single file, no formation.
I see.
And our airplane had been stripped. That is, all of the 315 bomb wing airplanes had been stripped of the heavy concentration of guns, machine guns, in order to give us more speed and more capability of a load. And all we had was tail guns.
I see.
Which we never used. I don't believe that we were ever attacked in the air. We did get, on one mission, we were caught in a searchlight. And I think we actually got hit by some flak, although the plane was bouncing around so much over the target area from the heat rising out of the fires that had been set by the bombers that had come before us, that we didn't recognize anything from the flak.
I see.
And yet, when I looked out at the number 2 engine on the way back, I saw what I thought was a hole in the top of the nacelle. And I talked with the pilot, and he said the engine was running okay. Just keep an eye on it. And when it became light, it was indeed a hole. I can't believe that a piece of flak was able to get behind a 4-bladed propeller turning at 2,500 RPM, and yet it did, because when we landed, the mechanics found that piece of flak at the bottom of the nacelle.
Wow. Wow, that's something.
And then we found also that we had a bunch of holes in the bomb bay doors. So we had been hit, I guess. But
yeah, it sounds that way. Well, I'm glad that you and your crew made it okay throughout all those missions. And I think it's especially interesting that you were on the last mission, because it may have been that last mission that finally forced the surrender. If the nuclear bombs didn't do that, then maybe they were thinking about it, but they realized that we were still serious and we still had capabilities, and this was not going to end until they surrendered, and so they did.
Yeah. Following that, I think one of the most interesting things that we did was to fly as a part of the mission to drop supplies into the POW camps in Japan. And we had to go to the Philippines to pick up parachutes, fly them back to Saipan, drop them off, fly to Saipan the next day to pick up the bundles, and then fly up to Japan to drop the bundles into the POW camp. That was obviously the most important thing as far as I was concerned.
Absolutely.
Although we never knew whether the bundles actually landed properly and whether we hurt anybody. But
it's an important mission to essentially begin the rescue of those soldiers, airmen who were captured during the war.
Yes, indeed.
Lieutenant Zeiner, thank you very much for speaking with us today. And thank you very much for your service.
Thank you.
I think serving in the military is great. I was never in the military myself, but I did have the opportunity as a contractor to spend some time in Iraq and Afghanistan, working alongside the troops and working with the Air Force. Of course, it was the U.S. Army Air Corps at the time when you were serving, and now, of course, it's the Air Force. But thank you very much for your service. Thank you for all that you did to help ensure freedom in America. We have that here, and many places don't. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you.
Thanks.
Nice to chat with you.
Nice to chat with you. Thanks. Look forward to seeing you at City Hall. And we're going to step aboard the B-29 in just a moment here. So thank you very much. We'll be with you again in just a moment. cockpit of the B-29 bomber made by Boeing. This is a Super Fortress. 4 2,000 horsepower engines, and crew would be aboard this airplane flying for 17, 18 hours, whatever it took to get to the target and back. Sometimes a fighter escort, sometimes not. This is a beautiful airplane. We're sitting here with Don. Don is a member of the crew of FIFI, the B-29, the only flying B-29 in the world. And Don, tell us a little bit about the airplane here and what it's like to be part of the crew, and maybe how you got involved, what the history of this airplane is.
Well, I got involved about a year ago when they visited Connecticut, and I joined the squadron and started to volunteer. And then you go through a training process with them, and a very stringent training process. This airplane has been flying for years and does the circuit, just like the PGA golf.
Sure.
We're all volunteers here. Everyone here is volunteer, and the only way this aircraft is kept in the air is by the gate charges and the rides. That's it. We get no funding from anyone.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's if we did not have the volunteers, we couldn't do it. Simple as that.
Well, it's a very complex aircraft.
Very.
To keep aloft.
It is.
We talked a little bit about the engines. These engines during World War II would have had a 75 to 100 hour lifespan.
That's right.
Now you're able to get more out of them because we've removed the turbocharger, supercharger.
Right, and we have also made these engines a hybrid engine, which what we did was we put pieces of different versions of the engine together to make it more reliable.
I see.
And now they're relatively very reliable now.
And of course, it's a piston engine.
Yeah.
These are not turbine engines.
No.
It's not a modern jet engine
No.
or turboprop. It's a
No.
piston engine.
Right.
How many cylinders do we have per engine?
I'm not sure. Probably 18? 18, yeah.
18 cylinders per engine.
Yeah.
So folks at home who are driving a 4-cylinder car, they get 20 or 30 years out of it if you're like me.
Right. And then always on there are always odd number of cylinders on each ring. There's 2 rings, 2 banks of 9.
2 banks of 9 to get 2,000 horsepower to move this airplane through the air.
Yeah. This uses 400 gallons an hour in cruise. Yeah.
400 gallons an hour.
Yeah.
That's a heavy airplane.
A heavy airplane.
You're
yes.
getting this thing up and in the air.
Yes.
Now the pilot sits in the left seat. I'm sitting here in the co-pilot seat. Pilots in airplanes, anyone who's watching as a pilot knows that you've got the yoke and you've got your power levers or throttle between the seats. Now I don't see any power levers or throttles here. How does that work in this airplane?
In this airplane, Glenn is at the flight engineer's table, and that is pretty much it. He runs this airplane. The pilot calls out what settings he needs during takeoff, cruise, landing, and the flight engineer does it for him. The only time these throttles are used here is for taxiing.
So it gets pretty busy, I imagine.
Very
because
busy.
Normally, if I'm teaching someone how to fly, I'm a flight instructor. I can tell them to add power or whatnot, and the student or the pilot is seeing a manifold pressure gauge, or they're seeing a tachometer, and they can add power and take it out
Not here.
based on what they see.
Not
but
here.
here, no, you have to tell the guy back here.
Right. So there's a lag. There's a lag. So if he sees something that has to be done immediately, he'll call it out to the FE, and the FE will do it. But there's a seconds of lag, right? So you have to be ahead of this airplane. You really do.
And flying the airplane, of course, is a little bit different too. This is made by Boeing, the
Yeah.
Boeing Super Fortress.
Right.
And today, a Boeing airplane, a Boeing 747, they've got fly-by-wire. People might have heard about that, where you move the controls and you're telling the computer what to tell the control surface to do. And other airplanes, you're actually moving. When you move the controls, you're moving the control surface, and that's how this airplane operates.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how does the input at the yoke get transmitted to the ailerons way out on the wing, or to the elevator way back there?
They're all cables. Cables go everywhere. This is an all-electric airplane, so there's no hydraulics. There's no power.
No hydraulics, okay.
No, the only hydraulics are the brakes. So there's no power steering here. So when you turn this airplane, you turn this airplane.
And this airplane's heavy.
It's heavy, right.
So it might take 2 guys sometimes.
Well, yeah, I'm sure it did at times, sure, yeah. But it's not a light aircraft to fly. Not at all, no.
We talked a little bit about the age. In fact, we interviewed someone just a short while ago who was a radar operator on the last mission that a B-29 ever flew in World War II, and he was a young guy at the time. And the men who were flying these airplanes, you mentioned that the captain on the plane you were working on down in Connecticut was 24 years old.
That's right.
The tail gunner was 18 years old.
That's right.
And you also talked about one guy who wanted to get into the service, maybe on one of these airplanes, who needed to get up to 121 pounds.
That's right.
Now, I'm well north of 121 pounds.
Are we all? Yeah.
I might qualify because I'm too large, and some of these guys weren't able to qualify because they were too light.
That's right.
So that generation, they're called the greatest generation, they made some very significant sacrifices.
They did.
When Pearl Harbor was bombed, they lined up to join, and many tried to join when they were too young or too light.
Or too light, right.
Or too light. And it was a very different time.
It was.
Now, you take this airplane all over the country and you give tours. How does the public respond by age? You get gentlemen like we had downstairs a little while ago who flew on the plane. He knows what it's all about. You're a pilot, I'm a pilot. We have a sense of, and we're of a generation where we have a sense of what benefit those airmen and soldiers and Marines did for us.
Correct.
But how does the generation today? There goes the hell diver.
There goes the hell diver.
That's an airplane.
It is. My experience is that the people that do come out here, the younger group, they're interested in it, probably on a superficial level, but I don't think they understand the impact of what this aircraft had to their lives today. I really don't. I think they're so detached from what happened that long ago that I don't think they can wrap their head around what this aircraft and the other 3,700 that were built did. So it's sad, but I think it's a different culture now.
Yeah, I wonder how an 18-year-old would respond if they were told that they would have been the tail gunner.
Well, I've done that, and I give a lot of tours in Connecticut with high schools. And when I see them starting to lose interest, I'll say to one of them, how old are you? And they'll be 18 years old, and I would say, then you would be in this tail, at 35,000 feet being shot at. How's that feel? And it's foreign to them. Yeah. It's like you're talking a different language. Yeah.
Well, a lot of that is up to the parents and how they raise their kids and grandparents and all that kind of thing.
And the schools. Yep. The
Big
schools.
factor.
I don't think they're teaching history the way it should. I really don't. From what I'm seeing. Yeah.
I would agree with that. Yeah. We don't want to forget.
Right.
And we say that all the time, never forget, but we really don't want to forget because we live in a nation where we have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to vote.
Right.
And you see how low the voter turnout sometimes is. It can be very discouraging, but we don't want to forget the sacrifices that people made to give us the world that we live in today here in America, which still affords a lot of freedom.
But this is why we do this.
Good.
This is why we go to where we go and show the people what happened. Because there's nothing better than to have it in your face.
Right.
There's nothing better than that. And unless we do this, it will go away faster. Yeah. That's my experience. There's no other way to demonstrate what happened than to fly this around and explain to people the sacrifices, the technology this had, the flight characteristics, the failures, on and on and on. Because it's too long ago.
Yeah.
They can't identify with it. Yeah. So this is our mission here. This is our mission. And whenever we get a veteran here who had some intimate contact with this aircraft, we allow them in it.
Great.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
Good.
Whether he was a crew member, a radar operator, whatever he was, we allow them in it so that they can experience it. And that's an experience for us.
Yes.
Because these guys are emotional.
Yes, no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
I've got an 18-year-old nephew who's coming up from Connecticut tomorrow to take a look at Daniel Webster College. He's thinking about going to college up here, and he wants to be a pilot, so hopefully we'll have a good day, and I'll take him flying tomorrow. Yeah. But he's hoping to go to the Navy someday.
Okay.
I've tried to have an influence on him and tell him that service is good. I was never in the military myself, but I was a civilian contractor, and I spent some time in Iraq and Afghanistan, and you have a chance to see what Americans are doing to keep this country and the world safe.
That's right.
And I'm glad to have been able to instill some of that in him. Maybe I'll bring him by and let him see.
You should bring him by and see what it was all about, because those are the guys that we need now.
Right.
And we need for them to identify.
Well, he has a character. I think he has a determination.
Yeah.
He
need
has
that.
The sense of loyalty and duty that I think are important this generation.
Oh, absolutely. And unfortunately, I think we lack it.
Yeah.
I hate to say it. I really do.
Well, we'll do our part. I'm trying to do my part in the Aldermanic Chamber. Sometimes it's difficult.
Yeah, it is.
You guys are doing your part here at the B-29 tour.
Yeah.
So we really appreciate it. Don, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. We're going to take another look maybe in the back of the airplane in a few minutes.
Yep.
But it's a great thing for Nashua that you guys come here.
We love it here.
Good.
When we come here, we are so welcomed.
Good. I'm glad to hear
Honestly,
that.
it's one of our best stops.
Great. Well, as a member of city government,
Yeah.
I'm very glad to hear
Yeah.
that. That's good feedback.
No, it's
for
true.
us, so.
It's the truth. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much for your
Okay,
time.
thank you.
We'll talk to you later.
Okay.
We'll head back to the rear part of the airplane in just a moment here, and then we'll be concluding our tour of the B-29 at FIFI. All right, folks, here we are again now in the B-29. We're in the center section. This would be the gunner section. And we're with Don, who's going to give us some more explanation as to what happened here. What was the crew doing in this section of the airplane? We also learned a little bit about the technology here, which we'll talk about in a moment. This section of the airplane is actually pressurized. As you may or may not know, most of the airplanes that were flying in World War II were not pressurized like your airlines are today. An airline, you can sit there in relative comfort. When B-17, the Flying Fortress, was flying over Europe, those pilots, those crew members, were not flying in comfort. They were bundled up. They had electric suits they could plug in. But in this airplane, which came out later in the war, there were some creature comforts that were really only being developed at that time. Don will explain some of those, but first let's talk about the gunning system. What do we have here?
Right. What we have here is this particular airplane was removed from all of what the B-17s and 24s were. Now you have a gunner inside a pressure vessel with a gun sight that is connected by remote control through wires to whatever gun this CFC or Central Fire Control Center man would give you.
Oh.
So as you turn this left to right or up or down, depending on what gun you were connected to, those guns would do exactly what you asked them to do.
Wow, that's very high technology for the time. Essentially, remote controlling the gun.
Absolutely.
You see the movies of the gunners in a Flying Fortress.
Right.
They're standing in an open
Right.
door, basically, and they've got a machine gun, and they're
Not
trying
anymore.
to track the fighters.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Right. Not only that, these had analog computers that calculated range. So what the gunner had to do, he had to be able to recognize every fighter in the fleet by sight coming at him at 300 knots. Not only did he have to be able to do that, he had to memorize the wingspan of every fighter. And with that information, he would dial in here with this knob, the wingspan, into the computer. And there was a circle, a lit circle, that he would keep on the wingtips. So as the fighter came at him, he would open the circle, and the computer, being told that that circle demonstrates 39 feet in the case of a 0, would calculate range.
I see.
Calculated range, it would tip the gun up to compensate for bullet drop. Not only that, the navigator would introduce airspeed and wind. This would lead to target.
I see.
So this was very accurate.
I see.
Very accurate. And I spoke to gunners and co-pilots, and this was like magic to them.
Wow.
And now you're inside here, it's warm, okay? You don't have a gun. These guys weren't going deaf like the B-17 pilots were, who had guns clanging around in their head, 6 inches away. So here you're sitting here, and if you saw a 0 coming at you, and there were none over there, on your interphone, you could ask this gentleman to give you 3 guns. And 3 guns would get slaved to this, all in unison. Pretty incredible from 1940.
Very incredible. Again, compared to what the B-17 guys were doing at an open panel on the side of the airplane.
Archaic.
Noise, wind,
Noise,
cold.
Cold. Their fingers would stick to the metal, Here, not the case.
And they were trying to do their own tracking. They probably had tracers in there.
They did have tracers.
In their bullet?
And the concept they used was called spray and pray.
Ah.
And literally what they did was shoot in front of the aircraft and hope that the aircraft ran into the bullets. Because they really had no other way of getting them.
There's really too much physics going on. It's very,
Way
very
too
complicated.
Much, way too much. And to think that this technology was here in 1943 is
Wow.
incredible. It
Wow.
really is. And people don't even realize when I tell them about this aircraft that it did this.
I had no idea.
Yeah.
And we're also inside a pressure vessel here, you
Pressure
said.
vessel, right.
Now, why was this section pressurized?
This is where 3 gunners lived And over there was a radar operator, because this had onboard radar also. This had autopilot. This had the Norden bomb sight. This had computerized guns. And I call this the space shuttle of 1944.
Wow.
I really do. So we're here, pressurized. There was a bathroom here. If anyone needed to go to the bathroom from the front, they would go through this tunnel here, which is pressurized. Okay. They would drop down, they would use the bathroom, and they would go back.
I see.
First guy that used the bathroom had to clean it. So most guys didn't use it.
Yeah, we heard the gentleman talking before. He said that as soon as they landed, you see the entire crew scrambling.
That's right.
Because they didn't have to clean that one.
That's right. That's right.
So was the entire crew pressurized then? All the stations pressurized?
Yes, yes. We were pressurized here. Where we were before was pressurized through this tunnel. The bomb bays were not. We don't need to pressurize that.
Sure.
Then the pressurization stops at that bulkhead behind us, goes back maybe 15 feet, then becomes pressurized again for the tail gunner.
I see.
Probably 4 feet of the tail is pressurized. And he sits there pressurized. So if he wants to leave, they either have to depressurize or they do, and they have to depressurize. And then he has to come out.
I see, because it's a sealed vessel.
He's sealed, he's back there in a cocoon. However, I've spoken to tail gunners, and most of them would sit up here until they got close to Japan.
I see.
And then they would go back.
I see.
Because you're flying backwards for 13 hours.
Yeah.
It's not fun.
No.
They played a lot of cards here, by the way. They did. I spoke
Well,
to a lot of them.
If they were based in Guam,
Yeah.
it's a long trip,
Yeah.
and they're not over enemy territory the whole time. There's not a fear of a fighter attack that far away. They're going to travel 10 hours, whatever it is, to get
13,
to
14
landfall,
hours, yeah.
and they've got a lot of time on their
They
hands.
do. So it's, out of a 14-hour mission, 13 is boredom, and 10 is chaos, right?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, 1 is chaos.
One is
Yeah.
chaos.
Yeah, and that's how they talked about it.
Yeah.
So this was the Cadillac to them. I mean, most of the crew were taken from 17s and 24s. And I spoke to several on this tour. One gentleman got onto his 29 going to Saipan, 300 miles out. Radio came over, war is over. He turned around and came back.
Wow.
Yeah, and a gentleman yesterday was here. They bring him back to the States because they had to learn this system, which was sophisticated, and he was ready to leave, and the war ended.
Wow.
So there was this whole transition from Europe to here. This aircraft never saw Europe. Never saw Europe. This was only in the Pacific.
I see.
Yeah,
I see.
Only in the Pacific there.
All B-29s, or just this one?
All B-29s.
They were only in the Pacific. Yeah.
Never saw Europe until afterwards.
Sure.
Where they did humanitarian stuff and stuff like that. And it flew the hump.
Yep.
Himalayas, yeah.
Yep.
So that's the only time this aircraft was used. It came late in the war. I mean,
Sure.
This airplane in 1943 cost $350,000 to build.
Oh my goodness. Some of these light airplanes we've seen out here sell
Right.
for more than that.
That's right. So
That's really amazing.
This was more expensive than the Manhattan Project. This aircraft.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's really something to think that all this technology developed when it did. I've read stories about the P-51 Mustang. It was months from concept
That's
to
right.
flying model.
Couldn't do that today.
You could not do that today.
Not do that. They made 2.5 of these a day. during the
Wow.
war. 3,700 were built. LeMay received over 90 a month
That is phenomenal.
out of 2 factories, but still.
And out of those 3,700, there's only one that's flying.
This is the only one that flies.
Are others on the way to being flying,
Yes,
do you think?
DOC is on its way. DOC is the EAA, the Experimental Aircraft Association's FIFI, and we're working in tandem with them to get that running because you can't just go to your local flight school and learn about a B-29.
Right.
So we are the gold standard for a B-29.
I
So they
see,
come
I
to us.
see.
It's going to be our pilots, our crew chiefs, our scanners.
Mm-hmm.
They come to our ground school, we teach them, because we literally wrote the book on this. Yeah.
Where's the ground school? How do I sign up?
Yeah, you can sign up. That's what I did. I mean, I asked, and they said, hey, the ground school's in January. It's 3 days. It's on your dime. Come on out. And for 3 days, you sit in this airplane, and you learn anywhere from running that APU to how to crank the gear down. Because they've had to run this gear unconventionally. Let's just call it that.
I see. And that's not just during war times.
Oh no,
It's-
no! Oh no! It's happening with us.
Sure, it's a very sophisticated airplane
Very
for its
sophisticated,
time,
right, absolutely.
but it may not be sophisticated for 2016.
No, and when you think that for every 1 hour of flight, This requires 100 hours of maintenance.
Wow.
Puts it all in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, yes, it does. Well, we talked about the engines a little while ago, and you certainly get more time out of the engines now, but...
And it's just this is airframe. You know,
just the airframe.
Everything. You know, think about it. You know.
Yeah.
This is a high maintenance girl.
Well, it's amazing, and I think that Boeing certainly learned a lot
yes.
from building this airplane, and I think some of the lessons that were learned building this airplane are used when they're building all their modern planes today. And it's really quite a piece of technology. Again, the effort that was put forth by this nation to come up with this, to build it, to man it, to fly it, is really something.
It's a tribute, and it goes back to those guys.
Yep.
I mean, that generation, not only did they fly these, they made them. You know, most of these aircraft that were being shuttled around were flown by women. You couldn't waste a guy pilot.
Right, a combat pilot.
You couldn't put a woman in combat, so they flew them out of the factories.
Wow.
So, and I've met women here who flew these out of the Boeing plant.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
So everyone played a part.
Everyone played a part, and truly the greatest generation.
Absolutely.
Well, Don, thanks once again for showing us here this airplane. It's really great to be in this pressure vessel here to see how the gunners operated the guns, and the technology is phenomenal.
It is.
I had no idea. I was imagining open doors like on the B-17. Well, they call us the Super Fortress for a reason.
That's right.
The Flying Fortress certainly was instrumental in Europe.
No question.
No question about it. But to see what was developed out of that to become the Super Fortress is really, really something. Well, thanks again for the time on the tour. Folks, here we are in the center cabin of the B-29 bomber FIFI. And we ran into another gentleman here who has agreed to spend a little time with us talking about his experience in B-29s. And this is Dick I'm sitting here with. Dick was a 20-year-old co-pilot on a B-29. He came in a little bit later than World War II. He was in the service during the time of the Korean conflict, but had some time flying a B-29. And we'll find out what his experiences were like. Dick, welcome. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk with us today.
When I saw this particular ad about FIFI coming up here to Nashua, I said, I've got to get there.
Well,
I'm getting there. I have to see that aircraft again. Yeah.
Well, it's the only B-29 flying in the world.
Exactly what I
and
understand,
there were
yeah.
3,700 made, we learned from Don before. And quite a few of them obviously were flying, and it's pretty rare to see one now. So I imagine it's a thrill to come out and see the B-29 again.
At my last base, we had 7 B-29s that we would load with electronic gear. And then, as I say, we would take these physicists and scientists from Lincoln Laboratories in Bedford up, and all they would do is perfect radar. And we'd try all kind of different schemes, take out wave guides that were pure silver and put pure gold ones in to see if you got a better signal, a stronger signal. And it was very interesting, and I did that for about almost 2 years. And as I say, the B-29 really was my home.
Sure. Well, there was so much technology being developed at that time.
Yeah.
There was aeronautical technology, there was gun sight technology we've talked about, there was radar technology, and of course there's the Loran and all the other systems that you guys were developing out of Lincoln Labs. So the rest of your squadron went over to Korea, but they selected you for the test purpose.
Exactly. Imagine, I couldn't believe, in fact, it was so, to me it was just, I couldn't believe it. And my dad being very involved with a few politicians, I said, did he pull a string and keep me stateside? So I went to the commander of the base at Hanscom Field, and I said, I'd love to look at my records, sir, to see if I had any public influence. And we pulled the records, and he says, no, everything shows that everything is clear. You were selected because we needed a fellow like you to work with us here at Hanscom.
Well, that's certainly great to know, and you
Yeah.
provided a great service to those folks developing the systems that...
The greatest thrill that I've ever had. As far as the B-29, we had an awful lot of problems with them. When we got this 7 delivered to our base. And the main thing was engine problems, overheating, engines catching fire.
I see.
Many a time coming back from some of our flights, I'd come back with one feathered and a fire in an engine and so forth. It was a plane that really had to be completely redone. They made them so fast during the particular period of time.
Well, sure, they developed them quickly and they built them fast.
And there was a lot of accidents with them. A lot of people got killed in these planes when they first came down the production line. And I read an article about the FIFI that they had 4 completely new engines built for this plane.
Yes, they did. That's what Don told us too.
Yeah.
Excuse me. They are
because the originals were horrible.
right. Well, these are more modern, older engines at this stage.
That's right.
But they're huge, 2,000 horsepower engines.
Yeah.
And there's quite a few moving parts. If you look at a turbine engine, a modern jet engine or turbine engine, there's really not that many moving parts. The parts are spinning at very high speed in a jet engine, but there are not that many different parts that are spinning. Right. And you look at one of these engines, they're not spinning as fast, but there's an awful lot of parts, valves and pistons and springs and on and on.
As co-pilot, I would have to, when we did the pre-flight, one of my jobs was to go to the nose gear and literally measure how much of the hydraulic was showing. And there was a problem with the nose gear with the original ones.
I see.
And because these don't have steering, you have to steer them by the engines and by
I
engine
see,
power and
I
everything
see.
else. There's no nose gear steering.
I see.
So it was just quite a thrill for me. And when I think back, I'm going back 62, 63 years, and it's just wonderful that I'm able to do this.
Sure.
And, you know, everyone tells me that I don't look old enough to be that age, but I am. And I was telling this nice young lady here about the pressurization in these planes. Because our cockpit was pressurized. And, of course, this tunnel, which leads you from here up to the cockpit, was pressurized along with this part right here in the tail gunner. And that, therefore, we didn't need oxygen masks.
When you were flying the missions out of Hanscom Air Force Base at that time, how high were you typically flying?
We were basically always flying at about 28,000.
That's up there.
It's up there, and we would fly down to Bermuda and things like that, and have research missions to locate things.
I see.
We had a mission to go into Bermuda, and they sent out our target plane 1 hour before we took off. And hey, we're all 20 years old, 22 years old, all a bunch of young kids in these things.
Sure.
And we didn't even keep in contact with the plane. And when we got to Bermuda, I landed, we parked the aircraft way on the side. It was a British territory base. And the first thing I did was rent a motor scooter. And I rode a motor scooter for 2 or 3 days all around Bermuda, which was great. And then one particular day, maybe the second day I was there, I called my wife, and she was shocked to hear me talking to her. I said, "What's the matter, hon?" And she says, "The commander from Hanscom Field called me and said that you ditched." And I said, "No, it wasn't my aircraft that ditched. It was the chase plane that went in." And they did go in. Everyone, no, thank God there was no deaths.
Was that another B-29?
Another B-29 that we were going to try to locate with our radar.
What happened to that airplane?
I think it was engine trouble. Yeah,
Wow.
engine caught fire or some damn thing, and it was just you know. And when she heard it, and of course my wife called my folks, and my folks called all the aunts and uncles, and oh, boy.
There you were riding a motorcycle
So
around
I got
Bermuda.
home, I got a lot of hugs. I really did. I really did. Yeah.
Well, that sounds great. Tell us about flying the airplane. What did it feel like on the controls?
The airplane itself flying, it was a little temperamental. There's no doubt about it. It was a lot of work. It was hard. You know, they didn't have all this beautiful stuff they have today with all this push buttons and everything takes care of itself.
When I teach a student to fly an airplane today, it's a light airplane, and we have a yoke in the airplane, of course, and there's a power lever, but I teach the student to have his left hand on the yoke and his right hand on the power.
Yeah.
Because we fly those airplanes one-handed.
One-handed.
Do you fly this airplane one-handed?
Well, not all the time, because we had an engineer here. And he would set all my speeds up and all my RPMs, and he'd do everything. He was the worker of this aircraft.
Were you able to move the controls one-handed, though, or did you need two hands to work these controls?
I guess I could remember always with two hands on the yoke and so forth, and you know, pull them back and so forth.
As we heard from one of the crew of this particular airplane, Of course, there's no hydraulics, it's just
Right.
cables, and we can see some cables running back and forth just over your head there.
Right.
This is how the airplane is controlled, by
That's
steel
exactly-
cable, and you
okay.
move that.
It was work.
It's work.
You had
It's
to
work.
do some work, yeah.
Because it's a heavy airplane, and if you want to move a heavy airplane around the sky, although physics is doing the work of holding it up
Right.
through the creation of lift on the
It had
wings.
good lift. That's what
Had good
you
lift,
had.
but you had to work the
You had to
controls.
work it. You couldn't just pull the yoke back and hopefully it would go up 4,000 or 5,000 feet per minute. It was
Not gonna do that.
It was work. You know, it was tough.
Well, great.
But
Thank
it was
you.
a great airplane, and I loved it, and I still love it. And I hope I'm around next year to see it come back here to Nashua. I really
I hope
am.
you are too. I would like to see the airplane come
Yeah.
back. My nephew, I was telling Don earlier, my nephew's going to be here tomorrow, my nephew Liam, and I'm hoping to show him around the airplane. He's a guy who wants to go and fly F-18s in the Navy or something like that. So he has the desire to serve the country as you did when you signed up and when you flew this airplane.
Quite a thrill. I loved
for the United
every
States.
minute of my service career. I really, really enjoyed it. And I took my 4-year discharge, and I often say, why did I? Because I can remember going to my commander at the base saying, my discharge service coming up, can you give me an idea of my next tour of duty? And he looked and he says, well, I think with your classification, I think you'll be going to Germany. And I looked right at him, and this is a true story. I looked right at him and I said, sir, I do not have any relatives in Germany. I'm going to take my discharge. And I did, but I'm sorry I did.
Well, we all have some things we would look back on and we say, maybe I should have done them a little bit differently. And I certainly do too, and that's one of the reasons I'm spending time with my nephew. I'm going to take him flying tomorrow
Nice.
in the
That'd be
airplane
great, yeah.
that I built, and take him up in it and let him get a taste of flying, and hopefully he'll continue pursuing his
Quite a
dream.
thrill. It's a great thing, and I was saying to this lovely young lady that the only thing I'm very sorry about, and we see these planes come in, and I also, when I got out of flight school, I flew the B-17. My first flight out of flight school was a B-17, and they had a B-17 a year ago come into Lowell Airport. And I called them, and their outfit was out in Minnesota. And I called him, and the fellow was great, and just in talking with him, one thing led to the other, and he said, you seem to know a lot about a B-17. And I said, well, when I graduated from flight school and went into multi-engine, we had to fly multi-engine planes, and the B-17 was the first one that I ever did. And he says, oh, you're going to be my guest. You're going to fly in this 17 if you come over to the airport. You're
Wow.
a guest of ours.
Wow.
And I did. I went over there, and they put me in the seat, and off I went. It was a great thrill.
Wow, that's great.
Great thrill.
I would love to take a ride in one of these airplanes
Yeah.
one of these days. The B-17 was here last year too.
Oh, was it? I
Yep,
didn't realize
yep.
that.
And I think they try to alternate, so the B-17 maybe will come next year, maybe the B-29 the year following.
Well, this competitive Air Force is a great thing.
Yep.
It used
It's
to
all
be called
volunteer.
it was the Confederate. Now it's commemorative, I think.
Ah,
They
yes.
changed the name, yeah.
Yes.
And it's a great outfit. And as I said earlier, it's a shame that younger people today, they don't have a clue about what this country went through during World War II, and the planes we needed, and the people to serve, of course.
Yes.
Because you go to a high school day and say, what do you think of a B-29? They look at you like, they mean, what's this, an iPad that I don't know about? It's a shame. It
Yeah.
just isn't going enough.
Well, it's up to us to talk to
keep this
people,
going on.
talk to grandkids and nieces and nephews and our own children, and I think it's important. So, Dick, thank you very much for coming in.
Okay,
I think
really
that
enjoyed it. I just love to spend time in this thing, and as I say, I can't recognize this that much because when I came through that tunnel at 22 years old, it didn't look like this back
Sure.
then, believe me.
it was certainly different.
It was certainly different.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your interview, and I think it's inspiration to the
Thank you.
kids. And thank you, folks, for joining us on the B-29 tour here at Nashua Airport, your Nashua Airport. And look for other activities here at the airport. The airport has a website, nashuaairport.com, and you can take a look there at a calendar of other events that are coming up. FIFI will not be returning this year. If you missed it this time, there will be next year or the year after. But take a look at the calendar and see what other events are coming up here at the Nashua Airport. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.
preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.